term nyo. So, madali lang. Okay, ito sa engineering data. Okay, so good morning class ulit. So, we proceed now to the next topic. Kasi open books naman kayo, as long as open books, open tables, that is needed in our subject, engineering data analysis. Okay. So, we proceed now to the next topic. Is it okay? So, proceed na tayo dito sa sampling, distribution, and point estimation parameters. We have the, last time we have the Z table. Now, we will have now the T distribution table and the chi-square. Okay, so papasok na dito yung degree of freedom. So, alam ko naman na, alam nyo na to. Okay? So, we have to analyze. Okay. So, ito class na the first slide. Okay, so we will make use of estimation because the inferential statistic is we make inference after we have hypothesis testing and estimation that is needed to infer a certain statistical study. Okay. For example, we have a survey by the Roper organization found that 45% of the people who were offended by a television program would change the channel, while 15% would turn off their television sets. The survey further stated that the margin of error is 3% points and 40,000 adults were interviewed. So after this statement or the problem, so we have several questions that arise. Okay, so first is, how do these estimates compare with the true population percentage? How about the surveys that are found now in the internet? Diba? Lalo na sa Facebook, the presidential poll. Si Bongbong Marcos ang nasa top as to the survey. Okay, number 2, what is meant by a margin of error 3%? Yes, margin of error of 3 percentage points. Yan. And is the sample of 4,000 large enough to represent the population of all adults who watch television in the United States? Take note, yung ano natin dito, class, we have a margin of error. Papasok dito yung margin of error and the sample. Sample as well as the estimates. Okay. Another example. So here is the different population, statement wherein the population from which these values were obtained are large, and the values are only estimates of true parameters. This is derived from the data collected from the samples. For example, we have 1 out of 4 Americans is currently dieting. Okay, from the Calorie Control Council. We have 70% of Americans had flown on commercial airlines. So, ganyan class yung mga estimation natin. Okay? So, sabi ko nga, one of the aspect of the inferential statistic is estimation. So, estimation is the process of estimating the value of a parameter. Yan, huwag natin kakalimutan. Yan. So, from the information or the information obtained from a sample. Okay? So, pinag-uusapan dito yung sample. Okay. So, sample measures, specifically in statistics, are used to estimate population. Measures, or the so-called parameters. And the samples are used to estimate the parameters. Okay? So, these statistics are called estimators. Ayan. Kaya sampling point tayo, papasok dito yung confidence interval and the different population sample. Okay. So, you might ask why other measures of central tendency, such as the mean, median, mode, are not used to estimate the population mean. Siyempre, class, wala dito kadalasan. The reason for that is that the means of samples, yan, yung mga samples natin, vary less than the other statistics, such as medians and modes, when many samples are selected from the same population. Okay. Ang the best class or the best estimate of the population mean is also the sample mean. Okay, kaya yan yung kukunin natin dito. Okay? Yan. A point estimate is a specific numerical value estimate of a parameter. The best point estimate of the population mean is the sample mean. This is the population mean. This is the sample mean. So what are the qualities or the properties of a good estimator? We have this. Yeah, we'll just read this. So the estimator should be an unbiased estimator. Why? Because the expected value or the mean of the estimates obtained from the samples of a given size is equal to the parameter being stated. Yan. Unbiased dapat. The second one, the estimator should be consistent. Yan. For a consistent estimator, as sample size increases, the value of the estimator approaches the value of the parameter estimated. So we need to be a consistent estimator. As well as the third one, the estimator should be relatively efficient estimator. Why? Of all the statistics that can be used to estimate a parameter, the relative efficient estimator has the smallest variance. Yeah. Pasok si variance. So we have the three properties of a good estimator. First, the unbiased estimator. The second, the consistent estimator. And the third one is the relatively efficient estimator. So what are those interval estimate? Okay, that is a parameter wherein an interval or a range of values used to estimate the parameter. Okay. Yan. May range of values na naman tayo, parang sa probability class. Range of values used to estimate the parameter. So this estimate may or may not contain the value of the parameter being estimated. Yan, take note of that. Interval estimate. We have now the confidence level. Alam nyo na to. So this is the probability that the interval estimate will contain the parameter, assuming that a large number of samples are selected and that the estimation process on the same parameter is repeated. Yan. Ang confidence interval class, ito na yung common natin nakikita is the 90, the 95, and the 99%. Okay? This is determined by using the data obtained from the sample and by using the specific confidence level of estimate. So we have to construct this way, the confidence intervals. Sabi ko nga, we have common, the 90, the 95, and the 99% confidence interval. So how do we get those? The formula and confidence for the confidence interval of the mean for a specific alpha. What is your alpha? Yan. The relationship between the alpha and the confidence level is that the stated confidence level is the percentage equivalent to the decimal value of 1 minus alpha and vice versa. Okay. Take note, pag given sa atin yung 95% na confidence interval natin, it is found out that your alpha is 0.05. Why? Kasi you have to subtract it from 1, the 95. 0.95. So 95% class, that is now your alpha. To check, ito na yun class. 1 minus alpha, this is your alpha, that is equal to 95%. Ayan, checking to class. When the alpha naman class yung given sa atin, 0.01, that is 99%. Ayan. Then 1 minus A, or the alpha is just equal to 1 minus 0.01, which is 99. So that the 99% is the confidence interval being calculated, okay, in a given parameter or a given problem. Okay, so this is the general formula of finding the confidence interval of the mean for a specific alpha. We have the mean, the sample mean, minus the z. Etong z class, babalikan natin to. We have the z table, di ba? Natatandaan pa ba yun, class? Yung table na ginamit nyo? Okay. We have also the population. I mean, the standard deviation over the n, the square root of n, that is the sample size. Okay. Which is less than the population mean, okay, which is less than the positive of the first item. So this is the mean plus the z-test natin na nakuha as well as yung times natin sa standard deviation over the sample size. Okay, so take note for a given confidence interval, we have now the z-test. Ayun class, kahit i-double check mo yan, makukuha mo yan using the table. Okay? You can use now the table. Ano nga yun na table, class? Okay, so makukuha natin to. Tuturuan ko pa rin kayo. Pwede naman to, class, gamitin mo na to kasi kadalasan ito na yung ginagamit. 95% confidence interval. So your z-test or your z-value now at a given alpha divided by 2 is equal to 1.96. Okay? So ito, class, anong tawag na ng term natin ng z-value and times the standard deviation over the square root of n is the maximum error of estimate. Yan. Or tinatawag nating margin of error. Ito kadalasan kasi makikita mo sa mga surveys na pinapublish sa news. Okay? You're given blank 3% margin of error. So for a specific value, we have now the alpha. So automatically, this is 95% of the sample which is given in the problem. And the error of the value is on the either side of the population mean. So here in the, as shown in the figure, makikita nyo dito, class, that this is the 95%. So dyan nagpo-fall yung population mean natin. Okay? Yan, population mean. So this is now the interval. Makukuha natin yung interval natin using this. Okay, so this is now the distribution of the sample mean. Given sa atin yung alpha, which is 0.05, which is equal to the confidence interval of 95%. Okay, pag divide mo to, class, this is now 0.025 on both sides, on the right side and the left side of the distribution table. Makakahabol ba, class? Sige, raise your hands. Okay. Okay, so this is now your, wala pa naman sinusolve. Okay, so this is the margin of error. Okay, ito, class, margin of error, your z-value times the standard deviation over the square root of the population or the sample. So this is now your margin of error estimate. Yan. How about when the n is greater than or equal to 30? Yan. We have the s can be substituted for the standard deviation, but different distribution is used. Okay. So mamaya ipapakita ko kung ano yung gagamitin mo if you will use the t-test or the chi-square test. Okay. We have the maximum error of estimate. Ano to? Ayan. That is the maximum likely difference between the point estimate of the parameter and the actual value of the parameter. Okay. So we have the rounding rule for confidence interval for the mean. Okay. Ano lang pinagkaiba dito, class? So when you are computing a confidence interval for a population mean by using raw data, so we need to round off to one more decimal place than the number of decimal places in the original data. And also comparing that by using a sample mean and a standard deviation, we round off to the same number of decimal places as given for the mean. Okay? Ito yung tatandaan mo. Pag pinapakompute sa atin yung confidence interval. Okay, this is now the example for that. Okay, so a researcher wishes to estimate the number of days it takes an automobile dealer to sell a Chevrolet. Okay, a sample of 50 cars. Sample natin is 50 cars. Automatically, that is your N. And has a mean time on the dealer's lot of 54 days. So this is the mean time. Mean. So we assume the population standard deviation to be 6 days. So this is now your standard deviation or the population standard deviation. So we find the best. Ayan, pinapaanap sa atin yung best point estimate of the population mean. Given sa atin yung 95% confidence interval of the population mean. Okay. So ano yung kukunin natin? So the best point estimate of the mean is 54. And it's now your x bar minus. Ano class yung z? Bakit 95? 95% confidence interval. Saan ka pupuntang table? Anong table kayo? Paano nakuha to? Your z is equal to 1.96. Yung z value class, pabalikan nyo to dun sa table. Ano yung table sa inyo? Table E or F? Anyone? So, pagkuha nito class ha, yung z test natin, yung z value natin, babalik ka doon sa 0.95 natin. Okay? We need to find that. We use this, the 1.96. Okay? Ayan. So, this is now your z alpha divided by n. Okay? This is now your standard deviation over the sample. So, kung dito minus, sa kabila, plus. Magpa-plus ka dito. Ayan. So, this is now the interval. Ito yung interval natin in finding the estimate of the population mean given sa atin yung confidence interval. Okay? So, with the 95% confidence that the interval between 52.3 and 55.7 days does not contain the population mean. So, based on the sample, 50 automobiles. Ayan. One can say, pwede daw, 95% confidence that the interval between 52.3 and 55.7 days does not contain the population mean. Okay? Based on the sample of 50 automobiles. Another example para mas maintindihan. So, given sa atin dito yung data, which is your N natin is automatically ilan to? 30. So, pinapahanap sa atin yung 90% confidence interval of the mean. Yan. We have data presented here. So how do we compute for that? First, we need to find the mean. Paano pagkuha ng mean? Sum up all those data divided by the number of data. We have the mean. And we have the standard deviation by computing that. Okay? Ito na yung makukuha nating standard deviation. Since given sa atin yung 90% na confidence interval, sabi ko nga 1 minus 0.9, that is 0.10. Since this, we need to find the alpha divided by 2. 0.10 divided by 5, we have 0.05. Okay? So, since we already found the z, alpha divided by 2, okay, we need to subtract 0.05 from 1 and to get 0.95. Ito. We have now the so this is now class ito yung gagamitin natin na 0.05. Yung dinivide na sa 2, ma-minus natin sa 1, this is now 0.9500. So, pupunta tayo doon, the corresponding z value, ayan, using the 7th edition beta class table E, makukuha natin is 1.65. Ayan. 1.65. Take note that this value is found by using the z value for an area between 0.9495 and 0.9505. Okay. A more precise z value obtained mathematically is 1.645. Diba class? If we need to interpolate this, ito yung makukuha natin. But we used, however, 1.65. Okay? In this textbook or in the class. Okay? Kasi mas malapit na siya. 95. Okay? Nag-round up tayo. Ayan na. Babalikan niyo yun sa pagkuha sa table E. Naintindihan na. I-divide mo muna. Minus mo muna sa alpha. Magkakalimutan itong alpha. Okay? So, after that, you need to substitute it in the general formula in the confidence interval for the mean. Okay? Sampling mean. So, we have now the mean minus the z value natin nakuha sa table E times the standard deviation na na-compute natin. So, ito klase, compute nyo to and as well as this one. Okay? All over the n or the total number of sample, the square root of n. So, the interval now class in the given problem is to find the best or the interval in the given problem. So, hence, one can be 90% confident that the population mean of all the asset, ayan, population mean of the assets of all credit union is between this 6.752 million US dollar, and as well as the 15.430 million US million dollars based on the sample of 30 credit unions. So madali lang to class if you know this general formula in this confidence interval. Ito lang kayo ito gamay nyo na tong z value. Ito, kayang-kaya nito. Finding the mean and the standard deviation. And the sample size. So, madali lang. Okay. Paano if hindi sa atin given yung sample size? Okay, so we need the sample size determination is closely related to statistical estimation. Why? We can make use of this general formula in finding the sample size for an interval estimate of the population mean. Okay? Ito ba, class? This is the margin of error. Diba? Balikan nyo. This is the margin of error. Excuse me. So, this formula is solved for n as follows. Ayan, dinerive siya. So, you have now this. The n, pag hindi given sa atin yung sample size. Where E is the maximum error of estimate. Yan. If necessary, round the answer up. Yan. To obtain a whole number. Yan. So, wala naman kasi na 9.6 na data. So, dapat 10. Round up. If there is any fraction or decimal portion in the answer, use the next whole number for sample size. Okay. Yan. So, how do we get that sample size computation? We have this. So, a scientist wishes to estimate the average depth of a river. He wants to be 99% confident that the estimate is accurate within 2 feet. From a previous study, the standard deviation of the depth was measured at 4.38 feet. Since given sa atin yung alpha in the confidence interval, so that is now the 99%. So we have now 1 minus the confidence interval. So we have 0.01. We need to divide it by 2. Hanapin mo yung value na yun sa z values. After that, we obtain this. Okay. Divided by 2, so that is equal to 2.458. Okay. And yung margin of error natin, ano daw class? And the conduit estimate is accurate within 2 feet. So this is now the margin of error that was stated in the problem. So we need to substitute it in a formula, general formula in finding the sample size. Okay, proper substitution. The standard deviation was also given in the problem, which is 4.38 feet. And the margin of error. So we have 31.92. But the general rule in sample size determination, we need to round up the value from the, if there is a fraction or decimal that was found in the answer, round up to make it a whole number. So round the value 31.92 up to 32. So therefore, excuse me, the 99% confident that the estimate is within the 2 feet of the true mean depth. So the scientist needs at least a sample of 32 measurements. Ayan. So kailangan natin ng 32 measurements. That is needed. Ayan. So this falls under the sample determination. Okay? Okay, so ito na. So if the confidence intervals for the mean when the population standard deviation is given, so ano yung gagamitin mo? Okay. Ito class yung gagamitin mo, t-distribution. Sabi dito, when S is known and the sample size is 30 or more, the population is normally distributed. If the sample size is less than 30, the confidence interval for the mean can be found by using the z-test. Ayan. However, most of the time, the value is not known. Take note. It must be estimated by using the S, namely the standard deviation of the sample. Okay? When the S is used, especially when the sample size is small, critical values is greater than the values that are used in confidence intervals in order to keep the interval at a given level, such as 95%. So these values are taken from the student t-distribution, or most often called the t-distribution. Okay. So kanina we have the now the t-distribution. So to use this method, the samples must be in simple random samples, and the population from which the samples were taken must be normally distributed, or the sample size must be 30 or more. Okay. So this is the characteristic of the distribution. So this is just the same or similar to the normal distribution class, but this is the difference between them. Ayan, following ways. The variance is greater than 1. The t-distribution is actually a family of curves that is based on the concept of the degrees of freedom. Papasok na po dito yung degrees of freedom natin, which is related to the sample size, as well as this. As the sample size increases, the t-distribution approaches the standard normal distribution. So we have now many statistical distribution that is used as a concept of the degrees of freedom. So in finding the degree of freedom, that is the number of values that are free to vary after a sample statistic has been computed. So madali-dali lang to class na degrees of freedom. So we need to compute for this. So the degree of freedom tells the researcher which specific curve to be used when a distribution consists of a family curves. So this is the next slide is the representation or in different p distribution differs from the z, which falls under the normal distribution. Okay. So we have now the concept of the degree of freedom. Yan. So magma-minus lang tayo naman class. So the symbol df, d.f is now the use that is usually used in degrees of freedom. Okay. So the degree of freedom is equal to n minus 1. Ito po yung general equation natin. So kung kanina we have a general formula in the confidence interval when the population mean or the sample mean is given. So, kanina class is standard deviation population. Ngayon, we have now the sample, standard deviation, sample, standard deviation. Yun lang class yung pinalitan and papasok na si degrees of freedom. And gagamitin na natin kung kanina that is a z value, we will make use of the p distribution. So how do we get that? Okay, so this is the table, simple table of the t distribution. And makikita nyo class, magsosolve tayo ng degree of freedom and given sa atin yung different confidence interval natin, pababayan, and so on and so forth. Yan, one-tailed or two-tails. Given sa atin yung t-test. Okay? Okay. So, how do we get a t-distribution? So, how do we solve this? So, we need, for example, we need to find the t-distribution for a given confidence interval value, which is 95% when the sample size is 22. Okay. Given sa atin, yung degrees of freedom natin, yun muna yung isolve nyo, that is n minus 1. The sample size is 22. Yan. So, we need to find 21. 22 class yung sample, pero minus 1. Ito na, 21 na yung degrees of freedom natin. From that, pupunta ka sa degrees of freedom table, pababa, hanggang makuha mo si 21. Paras lang class kay z value, z test distribution. So this is the table F, the t distribution. So, and given sa atin yung confidence interval which is stated in the problem, that is 95%. So, kung saan sila nag-meet class, that is now the t-value. So, that the intersection where 2 meet gives the value of t alpha divided by 2. Kung kanina yung z alpha divided by 2, we need to compute manually 2. Ayan. So, when the degree of freedom is greater than 30, ayan, it may fall between two table values. If we have the degree of freedom 68, ayan. So, kung ano daw class yung mas closer, we need to round down here. Okay, nearest table value. Ayan, round down to 65. Yung ginamit. Ayan, so here's an example again of a t-test distribution. T-test distribution, okay, given sa atin yung confidence interval natin na 99%. Okay, ilan to? Compute mo muna class yung mean. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So, i-add mo yan divided by 6. This is now the mean. And finding the standard deviation. Alam nyo na to, class. This is a sample standard deviation. The S is denoted as that. And finding the t-test or finding the t-value in the t-distribution using table F. So, 99%. Paano nga natin yung makukuha? Pupunta ka doon sa degrees of freedom. Okay. May tanong dito, class. Wait. Ayan. So, the degree of freedom here, ilan yung nakuha niya? Ginamit niya is 6. Ilan to? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pala. So, this is 7 minus 1. So, we have now 6. So, using the table, we have now 3.0705. Kukunin nyo yung klase dito, Ito. Dito. Ngayon, 7. Tapos, ang degree of freedom natin is 90. Ayan. This is 3 point. Makalula, class. Ayun, hindi na nakita. So, using this table, makikita nyo is 3.707. Ayan, class. So, gagamitin na natin the mean. Substitute nyo lang yung mean, yung t-value na nakuha natin, yung sample population, sample standard deviation over the sample size, which is 7. Finding that, this is now your parameter or the estimated interval. One can be 99% confident that the population mean number of home fires started by candles each year is between this 4,785.2 and 9,297.6 based on a sample of home fires occurring over a period of 7 years. So this is now the 99% confidence interval. Yan. Ito po yun. Okay. So ano yung gagamitin natin, class? So this is now the general equation or the general formula. Kasi class, pag ang standard deviation natin, alam natin, population standard deviation. Population. Pag alam natin yon, ang gagamitin natin is si z-test or yung z-distribution. Okay. Pag hindi natin alam si population mean, ang gagamitin natin is si t-test, ayan, and the sample standard deviation. Sample standard deviation. Yun po yung gagamitin natin. So students sometimes have difficulty deciding whether to use the z-test or the t-test values if given sa atin yung confidence interval for the mean. So sabi ko nga, when the population standard deviation is known, we make use of the z-test, no matter what the sample size is. Yan. As long as the variable is normally distributed or your n is greater than or equal to 30. When your population standard deviation is unknown, and given din sa atin is n is greater than or equal to 30, we make use of the sample standard deviation and the t-test distribution. Okay? So, pwede din class when the population standard deviation is unknown and n is less than 30, ang ginagamit pa rin class is the t-test. Ayan na. So, yun pag nagkaiba ng dalawa. We make use of the z-test or the z-distribution when the population standard deviation is known, and if not, we make use of the t-distribution. Okay? So, yun lang kasi general formula. You have to find the sample mean minus the, kung mag-fall siya sa, for example, z-value siya, z-value alpha divided by 2 times the population standard deviation over the square root of n, which is the sample size. Pag sa t-test class, you make use of the t-test, so the population sample mean minus the population, the sample standard deviation, or the t-test, yung gagamitin natin at a given alpha divided by 2 times the population, the sample standard deviation over the square root of n. Okay? Yun po yung gagamitin natin. So ito class, madali-dali na. The confidence intervals and the sample size for proportions if given sa atin is yung proportion. We have different parameter. For example, 12% is called a proportion. Ayan, US Today snapshots feature stated that 12% of the pleasure boats in the United States were named Serenity. The parameter 12% is called a proportion. It means that all of the pleasure boats in the United States, 12 out of every 100 are named Serenity. A proportion represents a part of a whole, so it can be expressed as a fraction, decimal, or percentage. So the proportion can be represented by the probabilities. Yan. Ito class, the population proportion, and we have the p hat, the sample proportion. In finding this, you just need to find the number of sample units, yung x natin, that possesses the characteristic of interest over the sample size. Yan, dinerive lang nito class. We have now the q hat also. Ano yung q hat? This is the example. Parang babalikan lang natin kasi yung sa success and failure, pero iba na silang notation. Okay? So, in a recent survey of 150 households, 54 had central air conditioning. Find the P and the Q, okay? Where P is the proportion of households that have central air conditioning. So we have the sample size, the X, or this is the character of interest. So 54 daw yung may central air conditioning divided by the number of household, which is 150. We may have now the sample proportion. Yan. And the P hat. So, meron kang 36%. Yan. 36%. So, pinapahanap din sa atin yung Q hat. Okay. by using the formula Q hat minus 1 is, Q hat is equal to 1 minus P hat, makukuha din natin siya as 0.64 or 64%. Diba? You can use this or you can use this. Okay. So we have now the confidence intervals using for the proportion kung we have kanina for a given sample mean. Okay. We will have now the specific confidence interval for a proportion. We will still use the z-test. Magpapalit lang sa population hat, the p hat or the sample proportion. So, papasok din dito si Q. Multiply mo siya. P hat minus Q hat all over N. The square root now is sa labas na. Buo na sila. Okay? Wherein it falls under less than the P and less than this value, the P hat plus the Z test times the square root of P hat and Q hat over N. Okay? So, this is the maximum error of estimate. Itong term na to. Okay? So, we have the confidence intervals about proportion must meet certain criteria that NP or the number of NP so that the number of sample size times the P hat is greater than or equal to 5, as well as the NQ hat greater than or equal to 5. Okay? So how do we compute for this one? So actually, substitution lang to class na point estimation in the confidence, the sampling point estimation. Basta alam mo lang yung formula, sabi ko nga, or magpo-fall ba siya sa z-value or the t-test value. Okay. Another example for a given population, we have a survey of 1721 people found that 15.9% individuals purchase religious books at Christian bookstore. So we need to find the 95% confidence interval of the true proportion. Take note. True proportion of the people who purchase their religious books at Christian bookstore. So, given sa atin yung p hat natin or the sample proportion, yan. Yun plus, given na sa atin. We have now 15.9%. Okay. In finding the Q, just subtract it from 1. You have your Q now. And for a given of 95% interval, so hahanapin nyo to dun sa table, we have 1.96. So we have now the P hat minus the Z test. Ayan. Multiply mo lang siya ng square root or this is the error. Di ba class? This is the error. Ayan. So magpo-fall lang naman class. Just need to substitute it properly. The different values, add minus. So this is now you can say now that the 95% confidence with the true percentage is between 14.2 and 17.6% at a given proportion. Okay? Kasi 15.9 ang binigay sa atin. Okay, we proceed now to another example. If we have now the proportion, compute din natin yung sample size for a given proportion. Ayan. We have the P hat, the Q hat times the Z value at a given alpha divided by 2 over the A. Okay? Squared. Ayan. Muli yung kakalimutan niya. Okay? So this is now the given value. We have a researcher who wishes to estimate the 95% interval or the confidence and the proportion of people who owned a home computer. So, a previously study, A previous study shows that 40% of those interviewed had a computer at home. The researcher wishes to be accurate within the 2% of the true proportion, so find the minimum sample size necessary. In finding that, given sa atin yung z-value natin, paano nakuha to? Your z-value class, babalikan mo si alpha, i-divide mo by 2, punta ka doon sa z table. Kaya makukuha mo ito si 1.96. Ayan. Magma-minus ka pa doon sa 1. Given sa atin, 2% lang yung margin of error natin within 2%. So, this is now 0.02. Ayan, 0.02. Your p-hat natin is the sample proportion that is given in the problem, which is 40%. And subtracting that from 1, we have now the q, which is 0.6. Okay. Computing for the sample size, substitute properly. We have now 2304.96. Sabi ko, when computing for the sample determination in a given proportion, you need to round up. Okay? So this is now 2305 people who need to be interviewed. Okay? So that is for the sample size for proportion. How about the confidence interval for variances and standard deviation? Okay? So madaming possibility or mga general application kung saan natin magamit yung variances and standard deviation. We have to, for example, manufacture medicines. The variance and severity of the medication, the pills play an important role in making sure patients receive the proper dosage. Yan. Kaya class may confidence interval for variances and standard deviation. Yan. In calculating daw the confidence intervals, papasok na class si chi-square. Okay? So, si standard deviation and variance. Variance and standard deviation. Anong pinagkaiba ni chi-square sa z-test and the t-distribution? Yan. Pares lang daw, variable. Family of curves based on the number of degrees of freedom. Anong pinagkaiba ng degrees of freedom nila? Ayan. Ayan na class yung magiging so, this is now your degree of freedom class. Okay? Kung kanina, sa Z distribution, normal distribution lang. Yung T distribution natin, it is whether lowering or nag-taas lang yung loop natin. Diba? If it become narrower or wider dun sa T distribution. While here in the chi-square, meron talaga tayong angulo dito sa left side. Okay? So, dun class pag-iiba-iba depending upon the given degree of values. Okay? So, this is now your distribution in chi-square. Ayan. Naman yung mga given, madam. Ayan. Given pa rin sa atin yung degree of freedom, but eto, direkta na yung alpha natin. Alpha. Okay. Okay, so this is now the an example of a chi-square distribution. So, given sa atin, find the values for the chi-square at the right and chi-square at the left for a given 90% confidence interval when n is 5. Okay, so finding that, you need to subtract class the confidence interval para mag-get natin si alpha. We divide it by 2. Why? Kasi two-tailed na to for the right and the left. So we have 0.05. After that, to find the left, we need also to subtract and get that. 0.05 in the column. And degree of freedom class 25 minus 1, 24. So this is now to the right and to the left of the chi-square distribution. Yan na, 24. Sabi dito, to the right, subtract natin, we have now the alpha. That is 0.10. We need to divide it by 2. So that is 0.05. So yun na yung sa right side. While on the left side, class, dinirekta niyang i-minus 0.05. We get now 0.95. So, hindi ka na class magdi-divide ng 2 kasi na-divide na siya sa unahan. Okay? So, this is now the chi distribution on that side. Ayan, ito na, 13.842 and 36.415. Ayan. Ayan. So, this is now your values. And presenting it on a, not TS diagram, but on a chi-square distribution. So, ito class yung magiging yung shaded portion. Ito yung hinahanap natin. We're in yung interval doon ng fall. As well on the left side. Okay? Ano yung general formula natin? So, in a chi-square distribution class, ito lang naman, n-1 times the sample variance and the sample variance again. Dito class sa variance, walang square root. Pero pagdating dito sa standard deviation, may square root na silang lahat. Okay, application. So how do we compute for this? We have now the given interval, 95% interval of the variance in the standard deviation of nicotine content of cigarettes manufactured if the sample is of 20 cigarettes has a standard deviation of 1.6 milligram. Given sa atin yung alpha, which is 0.05, diba? Ano mo doon nakuha? 1 minus 95. Opo, yung alpha natin. Ito, 95 given sa taas. Okay, for 0.025 and 0.975 levels. Yan. Bakit dalawa? Kasi pinapahanap sa atin is the 95% of that. And the degree of freedom is n-1, that is now 19. Pupunta ka sa table, ito na yung may given values mo. 32 and 8.907. Hanapin nga natin ito. Sa table, degrees of freedom natin is 6. Ito, 6. 0.095. We have 1.635 and 0.025 ito. Okay, 14. Tama ba? Nalulaan si madam. 19 pala yung degrees of freedom. 19 and 0.05. 19, ito yon 0.05. 975. This is 8. And the other is 32. Yan. Dito tayo. Nakikita. So, 19. Ito class yung sa isa, 8.97 and 32 yung sa kabila, 0.025. Okay? Ito class yung value. Ito. And this one. Okay? So, you have now your distribution using the chi-square. I mean the values. So, since given sa atin 95% interval for the variance, we need to substitute it. Ano yung ginawa natin? Kinuha natin is yung interval for the variance. Okay. Kanina ba, class? i-square mo lang, that is now the standard deviation. Okay, dito muna tayo sa variance. Substitute mo ng maayos, we have 20 minus 1, that is 19, minus the sample, variance, ayan, given ba? Ayan. Sample standard deviation. Okay, tama. So, this is now your given interval. I-substitute nyo lang class ng maayos. Then, makukuha na natin si, how do you call this? The interval in the given problem. Okay? Ito lang yung class, pinapahanap sa atin. Wherein yung point estimated natin kung saan siya nagpo-fall. Okay? So, madali-dali lang. Basta may table, basta marunong mag-read ng table. And as well as yung standard deviation, you just need to find the square root of that for the standard deviation. Then, kuha na natin yung 1.2 and the 2.3. Okay, so sabi dito, you can be 95% confident that the true standard deviation for the nicotine content of all cigarettes manufactured is between 1.2 and 2.3 milligrams based on the sample of 20 cigarettes. Yan. Parang may conclusion ka lang. Okay. Okay. So this is the last slide, class. So take note, class, ulit-ulitin ko lang. In finding the different formula in the confidence interval, kukuha tayo ulit ng table. So z-value, yan, we make use of the z-value. In finding for the sample mean, sample size for mean, this is the general formula where E is the maximum error. And dito, class, sa taas, pag ang z-value natin, when our standard deviation, population standard deviation is known, we make use of the z. We make use of the z. Okay? But when the population standard deviation is unknown, we make use of the t-test or the t-distribution. Ayan. And your S now is your sample standard deviation. If the given problem is a true proportion, then it will fall under this. Ito naman yung hahanapin natin, the P hat and the Q hat. Given sa atin yung characteristics niya over the sample size, ito yung gagamitin natin. And when the problem involves the sample size, for proportion, ito din yung kukunin natin, given sa atin yung maximum error. And last but not the least, for the variance, pag alam mong variance ang pinapakuha and the standard deviation, automatically pinapahanap sa atin is the chi-square distribution. Ayan. Okay? So, that is now your, how do you call this? The general formulas in confidence intervals using the different tables from z-value, the t-distribution, z-distribution, t-distribution, and last but not the least, the chi-square distribution. Okay? Yan, class. Siyempre, mahirap yan. Wala pa kayong sample problem. Okay? So, sabi ko nga, as long as may pinasa ka sa EDA, makakapasa ka. Okay? Siyempre, plus passing naman. Okay? If you have question, then you can just chat me. Okay? Friendly reminder, ulitin lang ni ma'am, paki-bigay class ng access. Kasi, nakita ko yung iba, wala akong access. Paano ko yun ma-check? Okay? Yung midterm exams nyo. Okay? If you have no question, can you open your cameras para mapicturean ko na kay class? if you are, wala pa naman kayong midterm sa ibang subject, di ba? Ayan. Nasaan ako? Okay.